Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. What I am really thrilled about in today's episode is the influence of our guest. Together, we're tackling a topic close to many of our hearts, breaking taboos, and hopefully cultivating mental health awareness within our communities. For and I in particular, we're talking about our South Asian growing up and our community. However, we know there's so many marginalized communities out there and so many folks out there that are trying to figure out their story, their journey of mental health. And so we're hoping that today's conversation will resonate with many of you out there. And also here at MFU, we want to highlight that today's episode was inspired by a heartfelt email that we received from, and we always appreciate feedback, support, thoughts, because it's guests like previous guests that come on that inspire the topics, inspire the door opening conversations that we talk about. And when we received the email, it was very clear that is committed and passionate about mental health advocacy within both her work professional community, the mining industry, as well as within the South Asian families and communities. So story, it made sense. It would resonate deeply with us here at MFU. And so this is where we knew we immediately had to get together and explore this topic, because we've heard from folks like yourselves that are listening, emails and messages about episodes that we've been having recently, sharing personal stories that really link to building bridges across the mental health communities. So we're really grateful for folks like you that listen, that support, and give us a reason to keep going. So thank you for being here. I'm going to officially welcome you. So thank you. Did you want to add anything in your intro, anything that I missed, or anything that you want to highlight personally?
Hey, thanks, Karen. I just wanted to kind of preface this. I am a mechanical engineer, and I worked in the oil and gas industry in both Calgary as well as Fort McMurray, Alberta. And now I'm currently in Toronto working in the mining industry in an EPCM company. So that's just kind of my professional background. And I'm a born and raised Albertan girl, small town girl. So I'll give it back to you, Karen.
Yeah. We'll get into that. We're going to talk about where you come from, because as we all know, and some of us are learning, where we come from shapes where we're going. And so we have a lot of questions about what growing up was like for you. Okay, so maybe you can just help us understand when you talk about EPCM, that's what I call it, right? And mechanical engineering. So can you tell us a little bit about what that means? You talked about some other communities up north that a lot of Albertans would know about. These are communities that folks sort of leave their homes and go up to work in a couple weeks, week at a time, sort of back and forth. There's camps up there for folks. So it's maybe something you can add to or tell us a little bit more about your profession. And we'll get into a little bit about what mental health means in your profession as well. So I'm curious. So yeah, tell us a little bit about what a day in the life would be.
Sure. I'll start with Alberta because that's home, and that's where I kind of got my professional engineering career started. So oil and gas industry, I worked with Suncor up in Fort McMurray. If you guys don't know, there's a lot that goes on there. It's oil and gas. So we have tar sands there, where we're creating energy. I was in the energy sector for that and working as a maintenance engineer, actually. So I was able to work with folks who did do the fly in, fly out. We had vendors, we had contractors, engineers, people of pretty much every background that I worked with. I learned a tremendous amount. I had an amazing time, even though it was crazy work hours. I also should say that I was there full time. So I was there the Monday to Friday, kind of 9 to 5 kind of idea. But we did have those times where we would work 18 days straight, have to be on site for outages. It's a 24/7 operation. So of course You're kind of expected and required. It's part of the job. And then you and I did mention the EPCM. So EPCM stands for Engineering, Procurement, Construction Management. So that's what I'm doing currently. And essentially we are doing the engineering, procurement, construction, and management for companies in the mining field. And I'm working on a project that's based in the States currently.
So you work in a field that I know nothing about. So I'm not going to bullshit and pretend and be like, oh, blah, 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 this. But you and I have a connection, and that is growing up as South Asian girls, becoming women, as well as mental health. So we'll figure this out. But I want to talk to you a little bit about work. So first of all, are you one of few females, one of few South Asian females? Like, what are the demographics like? Who are your coworkers?
I got to give it out to Suncor, even though I worked for them previous to this company. Suncor is a pretty diverse company, actually. On site, of course, you will have its majority white males that are working there. However, they have a very diverse population. I would say Punjabi-wise, I think there was maybe one other Punjabi girl who was a co-op student who is now an EIT up there. And then I think there was one Punjabi guy who I met up there as well, who is an EIT, which is engineering training for those who don't know. Other than that, there was a South Asian community, large Pakistani population. There's a large Gujarati population out there too. So as far as I would say South Asians goes, there is a huge population. As far as Punjabi community goes, though, very small population.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's funny in some ways because, we grow up and our parents want us to be the top 3 professions. You made it in there, going with doctor and lawyer. And so I'm like, hey, then we're all the engineers. You hear a lot of women, let alone minority women, right, that are in the field. I would say, yeah, there's me in the boardroom and then mostly men. And so I'm like, well, I thought this was our top 3, professions. Where are all our engineers going? They're going the other route, the doctor, lawyer route, or my route, which was, the arts world.
Hey, to be fair, I always say that I respect the arts world because I used to get mad at my fellow engineering students saying when they'd be like, oh, engineering, we're way smarter. Do you listen to music? Do you read books? Do you go get Tim Hortons coffee runs in the middle of the night? Yeah, you can't live without everyone else. So stop. Please.
Yeah, right? Exactly. It's so true.
There are a lot of females in engineering. It's getting more and more. But it's funny, actually, I was just thinking about it. There are only 2 women, and I think we were a team of 16. There are 2 of us.
Yeah.
One on the mechanical engineering side, and we had one on, she was the electrical and instrumentation engineer. So yeah.
It's few.
Yeah.
How is mental health talked about in your field?
That's a really good question. Honestly, I genuinely feel like it wasn't talked about until I got there. And I was an open book. And from the little bit I did hear from my team who's been there for a while, they had said that things are different. Yeah, I didn't hold back. I was very upfront, and I have 2 amazing brothers, and Bobby, and for those of you who don't know what a Bobby is a sister-in-law. I just feel like our closeness made me think that even the people that we work with, we should have some sort of personal relationship. And we do spend at least 40 hours a week with them. They're our family outside of our family, and life happens. I don't know about majority of men, but from what I've learned, there are quite a few women who have a really rough time separating their personal life and their professional life. And I'm one of those women. If something goes wrong in my professional life, I take it home, unfortunately. And if something happens in my personal life, it comes to my professional life. So I think it's because of that and the fact that I do struggle with my own mental health issues that I was very, very blessed and lucky to have amazing lead and an amazing manager who I could speak with openly about my mental health. And they were very respectful and they honored it. So I that's where I would say I don't really remember much about anything else prior to that. There are obviously programs in place. It's one thing to have programs in place. It's one thing to go up to someone and say, hey, are you okay? Especially in such a crucial work environment where it's safety sensitive. It is important that we check in with each other because literally people's lives are on the line on site, right?
Yeah.
So I think it also comes from the responsibility of, like, as an engineer, we took an oath that we are responsible to, I shouldn't say oath, actually, it's an obligation, towards the community and towards the safety of people. And honestly, mental health is very pertinent towards the safety of people.
100%, right? Like, you probably have experience talking about the term psychological safety in the workplace, I would imagine. There was a term as I was leaving my workplace, we were starting to get familiar. Even though I worked in mental health, it's like the occupational health and safety kind of hazardous sort of world. And that's such a weird world to collide with such an abstract world like mental health. But it happened. And so we had to learn some things. And we talked a lot about what actually does psychological safety mean. And even in a mental health place, you are so client focused. Anywhere you work, customer service is always the first thing. And so we just like parenting, we put ourselves afterwards. And we're learning, a lot of us, particularly I think COVID was a good time when we all had to stand still for a second. We're like, oh, I'm actually not okay. Me too. Me too. Oh my goodness. And when resources started to, get blocked for many of us, I think that also sort of spiked this, oh my goodness, what do I do? Like, how do I take care of me? And so I think for me as well, psychological safety, I guess the point I was trying to get at, is something that was a new term. And so you show up at this workplace and, we're going to get to, like, obviously you have personal life experience growing up and mental health had a bit of a meaning for you. So you can show up at a workplace and ask for it. And I remember I used to do interviews with a colleague and he used to ask potential candidates, are you an ask or a tell person? And I really liked when he asked that because we kind of are set up that way. Some of us will tell things, right? Like ourselves, like this is how it is. But some of us need to be asked. And you sound like, are one that we're able to tell and say to your supports around you, this is, what I need for my well-being. Do you think that there are many folks like that in your industry that would be the tell ones, or like where would you say that percentage would lie?
I would say the percentage is very low when it comes to psychological safety. It's interesting, actually. You touched on COVID and how everyone's mental health dwindled. I actually got this job in 2020, was headed up to Fort McMurray from Cochrane. And I remember I had to turn back. They said your first day's postponed. So I was heading up to Fort McMurray March 14th. My first day was supposed to be March 16th, and March 13th, I was heading up to Fort McMurray, and I got a call from HR at around 3:30 p.m. saying, hey, by the way, your first day's been postponed. Because I was a maintenance engineer on site, I actually ended up going on site after 8 months, just because COVID was so unsure and I have asthma. I was kind of advised by my doctor, you know what, we don't know what this is, so let's just take it easy. They started figuring it out. I actually did end up going to Fort McMurray about 8 months later, and I was on site pretty much every day. I think there was only maybe one time where we were on and off with someone else, but I was full-time on site, considered as essential worker, because we had to keep the plant running, right? And I am telling you, that experience, it's weird. It had both a positive and a negative spin for me. It taught me that I was able to live by myself, which is insane. The spin was I went 3 months without getting a hug from a human being. When you're in a new city, have no friends there, new job, yeah, it really does take a toll on your mental health. And I don't remember really anyone saying, hey, guys, like, I'm not doing okay. I don't remember anyone asking for help. It was always kind of a safety moment. And I remember saying, because we do have those programs in place where you can call employee and family assistance programs, there was those conversations, if you need help, you can reach out. How many people reach out? I mean, I don't know. That's anonymous, right? Mm-hmm. But I do remember specifically vocalizing, hey, sometimes it's hard to talk to our leaders and our bosses about these kind of things, and even HR, or even going to, someone who's a professional. If you need to talk, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm just a coworker, like I'm at the bottom of the food chain kind of thing. There's nothing that you need to worry about. And if you need help, feel free to reach out to me. I had no one come up to me. It was kind of like, hey, I see your eyes are different today. Are you okay?
Mm-hmm.
And just kind of reminding people to check in with each other because you never know. So,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
just it, right? Like it's that ask or tell that you don't know. And I think we can distract ourselves. I mean, I do it all the time with surface kind of talk. Hey, how are you? Here's a meme. I was talking to someone, I was interviewing someone about this too, and they're like, yeah, we a group of guys, we always checked in once a week, kind of had this ritual. I'm like, but did you guys know that you were actually okay? And it's like,
Yeah.
actually, I don't know. Because we don't do that often. And some do. There's some people that are really good at it. And I think we have at least one of those people in our circle. We're grateful for that because they start the conversation. But in a workplace, there's, when I hear you list off for 3 months, no hug, like that's, you're in isolation essentially, especially when you're living afar for work. And there's many colleagues that would be in a similar boat as you, I would imagine. And even for folks that are living in the camps,
Yes.
outside of COVID, I know friends that do it. I don't know how they do it. It's you have your work life and then your real life is happening outside of that. And you hear stories where people are losing loved ones or loved ones are being born or there's major life events and they can't miss it and all that. Right. So I would imagine the stress level is so high, yet it doesn't seem like mental health is the topic that you would think we would be prioritizing. Why do you think that we're still not prioritizing it in a way where we're thinking ahead and thinking of our employees and thinking safety means their well-being?
That's a really good question. And I think the one thing that I noticed, especially on site, is such a fast-paced environment. One thing breaks, you got to address it right away. Otherwise, XYZ $1 million pieces of equipment can shut down. The company can lose millions, if not billions of dollars, And I think because of the intense workload on site, people just almost, as crazy as it sounds, they don't have the ability, the mental capacity to be able to allow any outside thoughts into their work life. And I think that's a very scary thing too, because I also believe that, and studies have shown that if you don't address your mental health, it can come out in a physical manner, right? And I don't think enough people understand that. And it takes one mistake, even one decision to literally have a life taken, whether it's your life or whether it's someone else's life or even more lives taken. And I think it's also still old school mentality. I think it's still, you just get it done. Who cares? There's no such thing as sadness.
Tough it out.
Yeah. And there is still that mentality there. And because of we were talking about this earlier, that I was saying that there's actually quite a lot of, especially a lot of foreigners that we have, which is amazing for a workplace culture, but also you being this, myself being this. And if you think back when we were growing up and we think about our parents and what they had to go through, I feel like it's still that same mentality where if you don't work hard, your livelihood is gone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I don't know if that's, I'm not a psychology major or anything, but I feel like it's still ingrained in us, in us millennials, I would say, and older. I'm not sure how the Gen Z is. I haven't had a chance of sitting down with a Gen Z and talking about these kind of issues, but I still think because there's such a major boomer
influence. So, right. Yeah. Like the culture, right, up top is so okay. So I'm going to ask you then, knowing all that, because boomers are also going to be getting ready to retire, and there's going to be, many of them are on that way. And so, what's the thing you think? Because when we don't address mental health for so many years, because the culture is different, and you're right, generations before have been taught so many things around suck it up and tough it out and be private and you don't talk about your stuff. And then when you think of if your workplace does host people from different countries, immigrants, totally. Our parents would say, like, you were constantly reminded you were given someone else that deserved its job. So you just suck it up and you do your work and you never complain, you look down, like you don't make noise to be noticed. So the question then is, as the younger generation is going to start coming in and there's going to be succession planning, like, is there a way to get ahead, or are we behind? Like, what would you think would be one thing that could help this potential gap of not addressing our well-being? And who's going to work? Who's going to take these high stress jobs? Because the younger generation's learning around that.
Yeah.
They're smart. They're figuring out how to do things in a very different way. And I don't know if our structures are set up in the way of addressing our well-being. So like, do you guys think about it in your workplace, or do you hear of other workplaces where they talk about some of these things?
I do understand where you're coming from. And it's really interesting because I know when I was at Suncor, they did start talking about psychological safety. Like, it was on the back of the stall doors in the women's washroom, right? And still, I don't feel like enough people are talking about it. And I think I think that people need to have courage in their own voices. Second, I know, of course, with mental health issues and depression and anxiety, you're always taught the best thing to do is practicing gratitude, right? I have a roof over my head. I have clean water. I have food. I have a job. I have a beautiful family. I have amazing friends. You're told to practice gratitude. But at the same time, it is wonderful. But I might say something that is a little, that some people might not agree with. I am someone who believes that you need to honor your feelings too. I always used to hear from people, that so-and-so has it worse. I always kind of use this line. I say, okay, so if someone wins the lottery or someone has a better paying job, I shouldn't be happy because someone's getting a higher paid job. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? So why can't I be sad even though people have had X, Y, Z happen to them? Don't get me wrong. It 100% grounds you. I truly believe in gratitude. I do. But I also believe in honoring your feelings, your sadness. And that to me is, I don't feel like enough people have maybe even thought of that concept about, honoring the feelings. Like, I am someone who has panic attacks. There is literally nothing you can do for panic attacks. You can take anti-anxiety medication. It takes a little bit to kick in, but the second you have a panic attack, you have to ride that wave. And I know I've been asked, either if you don't ride that wave, you are going to go crazy in that small period of time. And so many horrible things can happen in such a short time frame. It's insane. Or you can choose to honor the feeling, take it, sit there with it, do nothing, and know that there will be an end to it. And I think that's it's such a healthier approach. So I feel there needs to be more open communication. Like I mentioned earlier, just honoring your voice. Everyone has a story. Yeah. That privilege exists, yes, but with privilege also comes their own challenges. Yeah. People who have struggled, they have their own challenges. You cannot compare, like I can't compare my life to your life, right? Mm-hmm. If you're going through something, I remember listening to your first episode, you mentioned it was national, right? That you had, that was kind of the beginning of this beautiful mental health journey of yours, and this podcast and everything. I listened to that and I emailed you about this too. For me, I wouldn't have been offended. I would have probably laughed at the guy and been like, you need to educate yourself just a little bit, right? But again, because I grew up in Alberta, and you did mention that, right? It's sad that is such a normal thing. And that's where I can't come up to you and be like, get in, well, have a little bit thicker skin. I can't do that. Yeah. I don't know your history. I don't know what you've experienced. So in the same kind of token, like I want to put it together and wrap it up here. In the same token, I feel like that's the same thing with mental health and in the industry as well. We're such different people. We're so unique. We all have different fingerprints. We need to voice ourselves, and we need to create a healthy and safe and comfortable environment. People need to stop talking bad about mental health. People need to stop saying people are weak. Like, you have no idea what anyone goes through, right? And I think that to me is just the lack of acceptance of people is what hinders mental health in the industry, because it's a resume. It's almost like we're a resume, and that's all we are. but we're not. We're so much more than that.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's so well said. I think a couple things come up for me when you were talking about that, and you mentioned the younger generation at one point and not sure where their stance is. And I think we're influenced by those that are helping shape us, our family, our friends, our coworkers, the people that are around us. And I think each generation is more educated in that along the way. However, I know I've heard many times in our own community, in the Indian community, you have friends that are worried about friends in their circle who you can clearly see going through something, and maybe they're drinking too much at the parties or when they go out, or you can tell their shirt's not tucked in as tight, essentially, right? There's something off. And when you go to that friend or that cousin and you try to address it, they laugh at you. They think, suck it up, or, call you these names and think you're being a pussy, essentially. I'm totally fine. Meanwhile, people around you can see you're falling apart. And I think a lot of what I hear when folks come on this podcast is the best thing to help ourselves become more aware. Like, to me, that's just, if that's me in that story, that means I have a lack of awareness of what's happening. I'm not allowing myself to see that I'm hurting or struggling with something. And I think a lot of the guests like yourself, like when I hear you speak too, it's this thing called self-compassion that when we start to see that, oh, I am human, I have my own feelings and I have to honor my feelings, but I am still feeling sad or mad or whatever it is about this thing and I have to address it. I think when we start to do that and are being truthful for ourselves and start showing up that way for ourselves, I think that is the beginning of us addressing our mental health journey, whether that's in the workplace, like you're saying, or in our personal life. Sometimes we have these feelings in kids as well. Like, you don't know how to identify what these feelings, there's more than mad, sad, and angry. And as we get older and go through experiences, we start to realize, right, oh, that's betrayal, or oh, that's abandonment. That's what that, And so I think you make really good points about, okay, like we have to be responsible for ourselves, but it's okay for us to sometimes be helpful to each other when we're not seeing it in ourselves, saying, are you okay? Like, are you actually okay? So can we pause for a second, go to our middle fingers up? Because I don't want this to be the third time. Now it's been 2 times that I have not brought it up. And so I was like, it can't be 3 times now. So, okay, so let's pause for a sec. What did you bring to put your middle fingers up to?
So many things, but being in Toronto, I think the biggest thing that's really been hurting me is I throw my middle fingers up to people's lack of compassion. And don't get me wrong, it's a shitty time. Inflation's intense. Cost of living is crazy. But if you're going through hell, don't forget other people are going through hell too. And that gives you no right to be not compassionate. So just check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Yeah, well said, right? Yes. Are you experiencing that there's very little room right now for care for others? Is that, like people are like highly stressed?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah. So in their own little bubbles, in their own little worlds. And it's crazy. It's as simple as during rush time in the morning, check your shoulder if you're opening a door to see if someone's right behind you.
Oh, yeah.
And if they are, the door open for a little bit. Because I feel for people. Don't get me wrong. I'm an empath. But I'm starting to feel for myself finally too now.
Yeah. It's always interesting, hey, when you start to, that self-compassion, when you're like, oh yeah, what about me? But that also breaks my heart. Like just the etiquette, that's sometimes one of the first things that's out the window when we are highly stressed or our frustration tolerance is so low or not at capacity. And so that's one of the first things that goes out the window for me too, is driving is a great example, right? My kids the other day were like, both boys were telling me how I need to, exactly like you said, check myself before I wreck myself because my road rage is out of hand lately. And I'm like, oh, when someone brings it to your attention, you're like, okay, is this a pattern? Like, and then, I learned in my previous line of work from my supervisor, if someone brings something to your attention once and then they do it again a second time, a pattern is forming. So within 1 week, I was reminded twice by the kids, road rage. And I was like, yeah, that's my first sign that I'm leaking, of my compassion's going out the window, because every single person that I'm driving around sucks. And that's just not possible. And I must suck too, obviously, but of course I don't. I'm the best
No,
driver in the world, right? And then, yeah, and then that's how the accidents happen, when you're just driving with overconfidence. So to me, that's a first sign, is like, okay, if you want to know if you have like passion for others, how's your driving and how compassionate are you towards the other drivers on the road?
I invite you to come to Toronto and drive. It will humble you. You will go back to Calgary, the happiest driver in the entire world.
Wide spaces out here, right?
Oh my goodness.
Like, do you have any other MFUs?
I also want to say MFU to toxic masculinity. Guys, you are kings. You have emotions. You are people. You are allowed to be sad. You are allowed to be depressed. You are allowed to be anxious. You're allowed all the feelings in the world, and you are allowed to express it. Don't think that it makes you any less masculine. In fact, I respect you if you have the courage to break what we have grown up with, that men don't cry. I truly believe that a strong man is sure enough of himself to be able to express his emotions. So please, men out there, you are loved, you are beautiful. And I say this to women too, you are kings. Women, you are queens. You are beautiful souls, every single one of you. So that's another MFU.
It's always good reminders when we have loved ones or people that care for us, or our little cheerleaders that text us or message us or tell us these little things that help us open that door just a little bit more. So I'm grateful for those folks for sure that help that. Let's go back for a sec. We talked a little bit about work and the community of mental health, the work that maybe folks can do. You shared a lot about speaking up, the whole ask and tell. So we should look out for each other and check in with each other, and also encouraging ourselves to speak up, to manage our well-being, and looking at it from a place of safety, keeping it's my job to keep myself safe. So I want to know a little bit about, you talked about when you showed up at work, because you mental health has a meaning for you. You shared with managers and leadership a little bit about that. So then I'm like, okay, well, what was growing up? How was mental health talked about for you growing up? Was that something that was celebrated or encouraged? How did the woman that showed up at work, who was she as a young person, and what was mental health like for her in her life?
So absolutely not. It was not encouraged when we were growing up. It was more like very, very typical Punjabi family. You get high grades. I got to say, the family wasn't typical in the sense that I played pretty much the same sports that my brothers did growing up. And I was very much encouraged. And I was always told, I love my dad for this, because I always felt that I was better than the boys. How did it translate into my adult life? Maybe not the best, but that's another story for another day. So I grew up in Cochrane, Alberta. I was born way up north, high level Alberta, which is even more north than Fort McMurray. That's because my dad was working in the oil and gas industry up in Rainbow Lake. So that was the closest hospital, was high level. Moved to Cochrane in 93, I believe. So I was about a year and a half old. And there was, if I remember correctly, Mom was saying there's about 5,000 people who were there. It's grown tremendously. I think there's like 36,000 now. So it's crazy. But we essentially grew up in a very Caucasian prairie town. We had friends who were farmers, and we live on an acreage too. And just kind of everyone knew everyone. I had a very structured life growing up. My mom and dad always knew where we were, what we were doing, who we were with. The boys have to stay away from girls have to stay away from the boys, and just honor your culture. The interesting thing is, even though I was raised in Cochrane, we were still a very traditional family. Like, we went to the Gurdwara, which is, for those of you who don't know, it's a Sikh worship place. And every Friday, so we'd learn to read and write Punjabi there. And then my dadi dada, so my dad's parents, were also in Calgary. So we still had a very big Punjabi community that we were attached to, but majority of our time was spent in Cochrane. So I know you and I have discussed, that I just honestly didn't see my color, which is really interesting because my little brother chose to keep his dastard, which is his turban, when he was in grade 2, I believe he started tying it. And that was shortly after. So 9/11 happened in 2001. So in 2002, he started keeping his hair. And because it's such a white community, they associated a turban with, unfortunately, what the media had portrayed as terrorism. And again, that's a whole other topic that I don't want to get into. He lost a lot of friends. He got into a lot of fights. He was a very lonely person, but an incredibly strong child. I don't know how he did it. So it's really interesting. We're only 17 months apart. So I grew up not feeling my skin color, whereas he did. But I started feeling it in high school. It was because someone had mentioned, something about me being a terrorist. And we had a dodgeball team, and because there was so few colored kids, and when I say colored, we made a team called the Brown Brigades. And usually, if you're in Northeast Calgary, you'll have a one team of Punjabi kids, you'll have one team of Gujarati kids, you'll have one Pakistani team, there'll be different kind of groups. Totally. Whereas in Cochrane, we had Latinos, Latinas, anyone who was remotely colored or tan, we just put them all on the Brown Brigade. And just hearing comments, I remember just walking behind a couple guys, and they were in the hallway and they didn't know I was behind them. And they said, of course, the brown team's going to win. They probably hide bombs in the dodgeballs. I thought it was, again, going back to how, thick skin, I laughed my butt off. I thought it was hilarious. I was like, that's clever. But I walked past them and they felt dumb, right? Because I'm like, why would you say that? So I didn't really start feeling it until I was in high school. But as I got older, and even sometimes now I feel, I'm 31, I do feel sometimes that complex about, I want to get closer to my culture and my traditions. But at the same time, I have to honor that I was born and raised in Canada. I did grow up around Caucasians. I have some of my best friends are Caucasians, So you do get that kind of that complex, it's confusing.
Yeah. It is confusing.
Where do I belong? It's, you get those comments go back to your country. I'm like, I am in my country. You go back to yours, and then if you do, a Punjab, you're not Punjabi enough. Yeah. So you do those. And I never even realized it until recently. I can't pretend like I didn't love growing up. I loved it. But I feel like because my life was so structured, when my life became less structured, so, I was quite a high, an international level athlete. And when that structure kind of broke when I was in university, you have more time to look at yourself. I did not know who I was. I had no clue who I was. Mom and dad couldn't tell me what to do. My teachers weren't going to call home if I didn't finish my homework. And engineering, that was in itself something else. You start doing poorly in school. Even if you were a 90 student, you start getting 60s, 50s. You're like, what the heck? Why am I so stupid? And I think the loss of self-identity is what really started my mental health issues. That was the beginning of it, I would say. And it just got worse because it wasn't talked about in the family. Mom and dad separated when I was quite young. And I think we all at that point just started struggling. And we found out that my dadi had schizophrenia and she was on medication. So we finally learned that also mental health issues exist in the family. We could not comprehend, I don't feel like my parents or my family could really comprehend what was happening with me. Because I had such a structured life, I had started having my teenage phase in my 20s. So I started talking back, and all of that stuff started happening then. And I'll never forget, I was never happy, ever happy.
Growing up?
No, I was happy growing up, I think. Mm-hmm. That's the interesting thing, because I was so busy. Mm-hmm. I loved my life. I was so involved in everything. But no, when at university started, I just was not happy. And it wasn't until I would say, oh, maybe 7, 8 years ago when I started coming to terms with the fact that I had depression. And unfortunately, when you're in university and you do take a psychology course, you also start self-diagnosing. And I can tell you, I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I knew something was wrong with me. And it's so funny that now we're talking and all of these memories are coming back and they're, really flooding my brain. And it's just, it's crazy to see how a loss of self-identity, a loss of purpose, something as simple as being in a Punjabi family, it's being such a high achiever, to not having everything work out perfectly and having to, quit your sports. And I went to university in an era where cell phones had just started becoming more popular. I think it was 2 years after that when like iPhones became really popular. So that was in 2010. And unfortunately, like I'll keep it real. It's funny today. I'm sitting here. I feel so blessed as a professional engineer, but I got kicked out of U of C engineering in my first year of university. And it's so funny because most people don't know that. And I tried to get back in second year, still couldn't do it. Had to move to Saskatchewan, went to University of Saskatchewan. Unfortunately, went through something really bad in third year with someone who was in my class, and I had to redo third year. So it took me 7 freaking years to get my undergrad.
Wow.
And how I didn't give up, I think honestly, it was my upbringing. It was the sports that I played. It was just like, you work your butt off, and you get a bronze medal. Okay, like next year, work a little bit harder, you'll get that gold medal. And I think maybe that one drop of blood that was still left in me from high school is just, and from growing up, is just what pushed me to get it done. But one thing I realized, it doesn't matter how much you have materialistically, it doesn't mean it'll make you happy. And that's kind of something that we realized as the family got older and everyone started struggling with their mental health and had to actually start seeking professional help. That's when mental health in the family started becoming a bigger topic, when each one of us individually were seeing someone for our mental health, right? And another thing that I realized is, I feel like, I don't know if you felt this growing up, but the Punjabi community is so focused on what can be shown. For example, percentage. Oh, you got a 97%, but where are the other 3%? Or gold medals or trophies. Something that you can show the world that, hey, look at me, look at what I did, to not having anything to show. And I feel like mental health in our community has come from a place of having to be better than everyone else.
Yeah.
And the truth is, everyone is amazing in their own ways, and nobody has your journey. Nobody focuses on their journey. It's like, oh, she's a PNG. I'm still not a PNG, and there's jealousy. And it's like, you're like 5 years younger than me. You're going to get your PNG before I got my PNG in your timeline. And you don't know the blood, sweat, and tears, the medication that went into it, the hospital visits, everything. Like, nobody knows that.
It's really interesting hearing you share your upbringing. And I think there's parts you're saying that I connect to, and I think many would. And I think the, stories are different, but the feelings are the same. And a lot of it is like, our parents come here and their parents come here, and it's all on sacrifice. So someone gave up so much to give their family a better life, or so they think, and they don't really know what that is. And so then, status and all these sorts of things happen. And we're bred on, and I think it's not just a South Asian community. I think you see this in social media. It's North America for sure. We're just bred on this competition, and it's not really self-competition. It's like you said, it's external. So what's so-and-so's kid doing? So-and-so's parents bought their kid this car. Oh, we have to, so-and-so paid this much for their kid's wedding. And so we're always thinking that's those, numbers and those things are what are going to make us successful. And so to me, it makes a lot of sense when I hear you go to university and all that structure and all of the people you trust around you are telling you what your day to day is, and you trust them more than you trust yourself, because that's what we're taught as kids. We don't know anything. Our parents know everything. But yeah, we're bred on that. So it makes sense when you're in university and you're meant to rely on, in the North American culture, they talk about launching your kid into adulthood. So 16 to 17, 18, you're kind of getting your high school kid ready to go to university, or, and you see in the movies in the States, they go away to college. So, but in our community, we live with our parents until we get married. Most of us, right? It's not everyone, but many of us have very similar stories. And so, and even when we do get married or we become adults and get these degrees and stuff, we still listen to our parents.
Yes, we do.
Some of us still live in their homes with these, doctorates and masters and stuff. And so it's like, by day I'm a doctor, by evening my mom's telling me what to do, right? And so it's like such a funny concept. And I think when we can think about those things, they can really help us figure out exactly like you said, like, okay, where is my journey with mental health? Like, how am I doing? Am I okay with all those things, or are those things not serving me the same? Or like, you get to university and you realize it's such a big life transition. No one really prepared you for it. And I have to rely on yourself. And well, how do you do that when everyone's been telling you all your life, this is what you got to do in your best interest, right? Like, obviously, but now you have to rely on yourself. So no wonder you got kicked out for, not to laugh, like I can appreciate, but no wonder.
We made it.
No doubt, right? Yeah, no doubt, right? It took 1, 2, however many tries, right? Yes. But it's 7 7 years, there you go, right? 7 years to get there, and now you're going strong. But the thing is, like, would you, like, you have to ask yourself, like, would you have learned something different or better or what? Like, it took 7 years for a reason. And to have a piece of paper, the external thing, but the thing that matters, and as I'm learning in my 40s, is it's the inside stuff, right? The inside stuff's got to match the outside, and we're trying to match the outside to the inside. What sense are you now in your 30s when you look back? Because you're like, okay, you're having all these like thoughts. You're like, oh yeah, okay, going back. Like, what sense are you making of that? What are the moments that you feel proud of when you look back?
A lot of people say when you get your professional engineering designation, it's huge, right? Like, you're officially like, you're an engineer, right? You cannot consider yourself an engineer unless you get your professional engineering designation in Canada. And I always was like, what's more exciting, this professional engineering designation? This has to be like the coolest thing about your engineering, your journey. And I was like, actually, weirdly, no, it was my degree. Because when I got my degree, I knew it'd just be a matter of time when I got my professional engineering designation, as long as I worked an engineering job, whether that's, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, whatever, I will get it eventually. But it was getting that degree. After getting kicked out of engineering, after moving to a different city, starting all over again, redoing third year, most people, after you get kicked out, they never go back. Never. And I think the thing that I'm so proud of myself is just fighting for myself and fighting for what I've always wanted, and also fighting for my dad's dream as well, right? Of me being an engineer, putting the iron ring on my finger. And I'm really proud of that. I would never change my journey for anyone or anything. I hold my head up proud. Yeah, hell yeah, I failed out of engineering. And I just really, really want to print out my U of C transcripts from engineering and photocopy my professional engineering certificate and go post it around U of C and tell kids, like, if I can do it, so can you,
Yeah. Yeah, right? Because I think that's the thing, is like we grow up being taught life is so linear. You go from point A to point B to C, and everything's just a straight line, and life doesn't, and the people around us don't always prepare us for when we hit the curveball, because life doesn't go straight. And so I think it's always interesting whenever I look back and I think of something that maybe I'm proud of. It's like always a funny story of all the wiggles along the way to get there, because we're just learning about ourselves. And I think that's the thing at the end of the day, is like, okay, fine, 7 years, but in the 7 years, you get to show up at your job and say to
Mhm.
leaders, hey, by the way, this is the stuff that I need some help with that are about my own well-being and who I am. And I think it takes those 7 years of what you had to go through to figure out, to get to that place of prioritizing our well-being is so important. And what do you think in our community going well with mental health? Are you hearing conversations with the people around you where more are talking about it, or like what are you seeing happening?
I feel like in our community, especially as we start becoming mothers or even mothers who are younger than our parents, you start seeing that friendship between the parents and the kids. And I wish and I hope as we move forward that the fathers are going to have that same open communication with their boys. It's important for young boys to have that ability to know that emotions are okay. That's why I said MFU to toxic masculinity. But I think the friendship conversations between mother and daughter now is just people are able to go to their moms and say, hey, mom, I screwed up. Hey, mom, I did this, without the fear of literal repercussions.
Man.
Back in the day, like
that jumble can't come off fast enough, right?
Yeah. Here comes the bin.
You're like,
right?
Your arm and back have been hurting all week and we've been rubbing Tiger Balm on you. And I say this one thing and you've like have the reflex like some athlete. How does the jumble come off that fast, right? Like
just flying across the room too.
Like you need major surgery for throwing that at me. Like I don't understand. But I have to bring the groceries in every day. What the hell?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I find it. I got lucky as a girl in the family. Just saying, I got really lucky with my mom. But I think that open communication is really starting to help, and I'm proud of the young girls these days. I mean, we all at some point disrespect our parents, which is horrible, and they've done so much for us. And I love my parents. But I can tell you, like, that's one thing, especially after the separation and we all went through our mental health issues. Mom is my boy, like she's my friend. Mm-hmm. And I have a beautiful Bobby. Oh my God, that woman changed my life and my brother's life and so many dynamics because she's so fearless and she's so good with her boundaries. And I think in the Punjabi community too, that's another thing. We don't have boundaries. Yeah. If you're family, too bad, so sad. Yeah. If, it's like, I'm paying for this, you're in my house, you don't get to close your door whenever you want. You don't get that space. If I want to come in, I can come in. I think also the fact that people are starting to put up boundaries and being vocal about it, not just saying like, you can't do this, but there's that communication. Okay, why? And I know I say that to mom all the time. I always tell her like, Mom, I wish you told us why. If you said, no, we can't do something, I wish I knew the why. And the conversation she has with me is, I didn't know how to explain the why. Right. So it's also us, for our future generations, to have the courage to be able to explain the why, no matter how uncomfortable or how much kind of friction it will cause, because I can see you down the line when they start reflecting back on, oh, I understand why mom used to say, well, no, didn't know the why then, but they'll reflect and they'll be like, at least mom told me the why, So I think that's really helping in our community. And I think the fact that parents are getting on social media now and kids think they're sneaky, but they're not as sneaky as parents think. And I think people tend to forget that moms actually know everything, even though they cannot say it. Every mother knows.
Yeah, you know your kid. You know your kid very well, right? Yeah, sometimes my oldest will be like, how did you know when I said, something like, yes, I brushed my teeth. And I'm like, you just, my mom used to say this too. I can just tell when I look at your face. Like I can just tell. Like we all think we're great liars, but which means my parents knew more than they let on about how many times I would stay out late or do the thing that we weren't allowed to do, right? And I hear you saying too is when our generation is having kids, I know for me what I'm seeing, and I know what we're doing is actually understanding the science behind parenting. And so when we start to realize the brain is developing in different stages, I think you're like, oh yeah, that it makes sense that my 10-year-old would fight back in this way. It's because again, when you go back to our conversation and you're like, in our community, we grow up with a lot of on the outside, you got to be a good kid. You got to go to auntie's house and not touch anything. Yeah. But yet you have no idea your kid may have ADHD, right? These are things now why your kid couldn't sit still or maybe feeding our kid all those sorts of things weren't the best route. And so I think there's a lot more, like you said, education now, and I appreciate that too, with lots of parents in our community that are starting to understand that the kids have a voice in a different way than our parents were taught. And you make a really good point. I think when we start to realize with our parents' generation, they didn't know how to ask the why because they weren't allowed to. And many of us weren't either. And, some of us still struggle where we don't question authority, whether it's your boss or a teacher or something, because you grow up being told you just go with, you listen to authority and you do what you do. So is there anything you want to add to that though? Like when you were talking about your journey, like where with your family, because you also talked about separation with your parents, and that there's a huge stigma that rarely happens in your parents' generation, and maybe more so now people are, but it's a big deal to separate in our community. I know in many communities, divorce, there's a stigma, but definitely that's all we saw ever. Parents stayed together, because it was sacrifice. It wasn't about happiness, and that's not what a marriage was. A partnership, a business agreement. And so that must have been an interesting learning experience for all of you as well.
It was. I think if we were to do this podcast 2 years, 3 years, even 4 years after their separation, I would have definitely never talked about it. But now it's very well known. And you know what? To be fair, because it was so taboo, kudos to my parents, because that's a bold move. And they were both able to get out of a situation that it's just two people who just should not have been together. It's just very different, mentalities. And I think it takes a lot of courage to be able to face society and be like, you know what? Yeah, we did get separated. Yeah, I wish them all the best. Yes, we have beautiful kids. And, even just talking to my mom, she's like, I would never change it because I have 3 amazing kids from that. And to be fair, I feel like they've both become themselves and less worried about what society thinks and less worried about, okay, we have to make sure our kids do X, Y, Z. Whereas I feel like a lot of parents sometimes still struggle with that, like especially the older parents. And, like my mom has started being like super honest, that me and my brothers don't drink. And that's not, that's very rare, especially in a Punjabi community. But I have so much respect for my mom saying, when people do say, oh, yeah, your kids don't drink. And mom's like, you know what? I don't know, because kids nowadays, you never know what they do behind closed doors. Their own. So I have a lot of respect for my mom removing the blindfolds that I feel like so many Desi Punjabi parents and I'm sure parents of all different backgrounds have with their kids being perfect. And I think the fact that we are being accepted as human beings and that we are flawed, we're not perfect, just bouncing off of each other and kind of, sometimes they say you have 10 steps back to take 1 step forward. And I think family did such a beautiful job in that, in the sense that now, me and my brothers are so tight. Like I can talk to, my brother about how like I shouldn't have been treated or something. I was treated like such a tomboy and I wish I was accepted for my femininity. Those conversations are finally open. And the same thing with my mom too. It's and dad as well, like, hey, you guys, this is where you went wrong. And their ability to sit back and be like, yeah, I'm sorry, we did screw up here. And if I could go back in time, I'd change it. And we say, no, we wouldn't, because we wouldn't be who we are if it wasn't.
But there just sounds like there's a lot of like forgiveness there and a lot of acceptance of like responsibility there. And when I hear you talk about your dynamics between your siblings and your parents and the separation, and I think you're right, like kudos to any couple that knows what that's like and have to go through separation with children in particular as well. I think, my goodness, it's quite a process, but for the Punjabi family, especially at that time when it would be kind of rare to figure that out. And also like there's this underlying tone of when you realize that this relationship's not working and you kind of release yourselves from, I think, being held hostage by the fact that you think you have to be together. And you're like, okay, I think you start to figure out what maybe happiness means and that we don't have to sacrifice. We deserve happiness. And that's not a bad thing. We don't have to be guilty, because I think that's I see that a lot in our community. It's like guilt. It's guilt to put up the boundary. We learn how to do it because we grow up here in North. And I think that's a confusing part. We're like, we're supposed to have boundaries. And then when we start to do it, but then there's like this innate thing from our community, which is like, you're not supposed to do that. I'll give you an example. You live further away than your siblings. So I don't know about you, but when my siblings and I live far away and we get together, there's this guilt that we have to be up like 24/7 and with each other constantly because we have to see each other and we have to do everything together. And then when we're not together, there's this like feeling of FOMO and like you're missing. Instead of being like, I'm really happy you guys went and did that. It's like, well, I wasn't there. And, I wanted to eat that thing too. And it's so funny that it's how we show our love, but it's like, we're just so miserable, but we're not, but we are. And so I think it's like we're learning these boundaries. And at the same time, we're like, this is weird. This is odd. So I think it's again, like sounds like your family too, that role modeling of having a little bit of grace and, like you said, with the panic attack, you're kind of riding through that wave of like, well, let's see what happens. Because whatever's happening right now is not working. And I think we have to remind ourselves like, it's not serving me anymore. Super props to your parents for figuring that out. Because I think it's tough for people, still today for couples, it's difficult to figure out. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you talk a little bit about your personal experience growing up with mental health and working through some struggles and learning about yourself and relying on yourself. And you carry that to your workplace, which is, like you said, another family. And how do we have these conversations? How do we manage our well-being? So knowing what you know now and today, what would you go back and tell little that, or university that was just learning about some struggles and what mental health was? What would you go back and tell her now?
Honestly, the biggest thing that stands out is you're not crazy. You're not crazy for having emotions. You're not crazy for having different thoughts. You're not crazy for wanting to do or try something that might be taboo. It's not crazy. It's just who you are, and you're different and you're unique, and that's okay. And embrace it. Love it. You're not going to be, nobody's perfect. So I think that's what I would tell myself is just learn to love yourself. Things will fall in place as they're supposed to. When shit hits the fan, trust me, it hits the fan and it's tough, but ride that wave. It'll be okay. You'll get through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, for parents out there, like, what do you think that our parents are trying to teach their kids and help their kids be successful? What are some things that they could focus on with parenting to help their kids get to this place where they feel successful, as we grow up with thinking success is fancy cars, big houses and all that? What would you tell parents today about parenting?
Me not being a mom, only being a bird mom.
What are your birds' names, by the way?
Buddy, Chichi, and Chucha.
Buddy, Chichi, and Chucha.
Yeah.
Little Chucha's a little one.
Yeah. Well, they're two tiny ones, and I have a conure, so she's a little bit bigger, but she's the actual age-wise baby, I guess you could say.
Oh. Yeah, you're right. So not being a mom, but being that child that grew up where mental health wasn't always talked about. And, that like in that perspective, they think about little like, what would you want to tell parents that are parenting little out there?
Yeah. One thing and I've talked to mom about this quite openly is I just wish they sat down and understood that we're not little tiny robots, that, we are different genders. We do have different experiences. We do have different interactions, and we're all born and raised in the same family with the same morals, values, rules, everything, but we're so different. And just being able to sit down with your child and have a conversation. Yes, sometimes you have to put the parenting hat on, but be your child's best friend. And I feel that, yes, it's hard. And I think that's something that we'll all have to work on when whoever is a parent or who's going to be a parent is being able to know when to put the parenting hat on. But yeah, I just wish the mom could have the courage to explain the whys to me, why I shouldn't do something. It's, and rather than that you can't do this, why you shouldn't do this, what the repercussions are, and ask me what I think about certain topics, just be like, I saw this on the news. What do you think about this? And why? just having those free flowing conversations. And I feel like in that sense, and having it with each of your children, if you have multiple children, and then I feel like you can get a sense of the differences,
Okay, so what about for our community in mental health? Like when we look at the gaps and the struggles to speak up, and we have to have that persona of looking perfect and we're all okay. Or when that person addresses, a worry, we're like, you're weird, get out of here, you feelings. Yeah. What would you say to those folks that aren't inviting mental health conversations or even looking at their own well-being? What would you hope that they would take away from this conversation today?
Just really sit with yourself and see where you're struggling. We're so wrapped up in such a technological world that sometimes you don't even sit down by yourself without your phone, without the computer, without something in your hand. Just detach yourself. I think for our youth, I would say like that's the biggest thing. Nobody is ever going to be with you 24/7. It is you in your own head. Nobody's going to show up. What we see online is not real. And it's a struggle. Even for me, it's a struggle. That's why I got rid of my social media, is because I'm like, no, this isn't real. And how is this enhancing my life? And I think for our youth, I think it's that. And I think the youth are getting like, especially Gen Zs, I would say, I think they're getting a lot better at, they don't care what the community thinks, what aunties and uncles think anymore. I think they're getting really, really good at that. Maybe a little too good. And sometimes I'm like, okay, there's still like, respect. Like, but,
yeah.
And I think that's something, but I also think it's our responsibility as children and as especially adult children, I think it's a little tougher when you're younger and when you're still growing. I think us as adult children to sit down with mom, us girls sit down with mom and dad and say, or us boys, or where did you struggle? What do you wish you could change? And have those open conversations, ask them, and encouraging them to have their own little group of friends, especially when they get older, where they can talk openly, because they might not talk to us. But I think as we get older, I think that having conversations with like our siblings, hey, you okay? I ask my brothers all the time, hey, your texting is a little off and just want to make sure that you're good. And if you want to talk, I'm here. I love you, those kind of conversations. And I would say to our Punjabi community, like, you guys are not invincible. Nobody's invincible. I'm sorry, but your kids aren't the perfect kids that you think they are. They're human beings. They have their flaws, and be okay with that. Be okay. Because look at yourself in the mirror first and see your flaws and know that you're not perfect, and then realize that your kids are not either. So I think that's the biggest piece of advice I'd give. And don't be blind. Take the blinders off. You have a problem, go straight to your kid and don't use the silent treatment or don't give the dirty looks. Just go talk to your family. It might be a little bit harder for the older folks, especially the, like that responsibility marriage kind of thing, to have those conversations. But if you have kids, or reach out to one of us Punjabi younger folks and chat with us. We won't interfere with your life, but at least you'll get it out.
Lots of encouragement about talk. And I think that's so important. And I would like absolutely agree with you. It's whatever way we can get it out from the inside. And as you had mentioned, there are so many connections to what doesn't come out, comes out through physical pain and illness. And, we start to feel fatigue naturally, even just tired from carrying all the weight of what's going on inside. And sometimes I think, like you're saying, when we reach out and share, we don't even realize we're actually helping someone else. And I think that's what we'd rather be doing anyways, helping other people. So if that helps us as well, it's talking about the hurt or the things that are on our mind might actually help that person that we're talking to who's thinking about it as well. It's like this beautiful chain that we're building. So thinking about building bridges of, when we think of connections and building our community and little bridges to mental health, what kind of bridge would you want to build that would help someone work towards the journey of their mental health?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think realistic, positive encouragement. I think the realistic is always gone, but I think everyone has a specific mental capacity that they're in. And I think you cannot have the same advice for every single person, or you cannot have the same approach to every single person. And I think that realistic, positive encouragement is necessary and independently catered. I think that's the best way to bridge the gap and just continue the conversation. Like I said, honor your voice, have courage in your voice. And whether you're a newborn baby who cries or whether you're, on your deathbed, your voice matters and you are worthy of respect and honor and love and compassion. So, yeah.
All right. Okay. So is there anything that you wish we had talked about today or that I had asked, or maybe even you want to go back and clarify or add to?
No, I hope I hit the nail on the head saying that I truly believe that mental health can be solved through communication and open communication and compassion and empathy. And eyes are the window to the soul. So someone might say they're okay, but actually look at them. Don't just take them for their word. Sometimes people need a little bit more than you asking that question. Sometimes people need you to look at those little things like you mentioned.
Yeah. So, sometimes we need someone to ask us twice.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. So if you were going to leave our listeners with something to think about or something to walk away and do around the realm of communication, is there anything in particular you would suggest?
Put your phone down and have a face-to-face conversation with your loved ones. Even if it's your best friend, if it's your mom, if it's your sister, if it's even a stranger that might look sad. I got told by a homeless person that he wanted to burn me. And I just was like, do you want to talk? Right. And you just don't know. Right. Yeah. So that's what I would tell my listeners is just, please just be compassionate. Everyone's struggling. Mm-hmm. And yeah, take that little extra minute in your day to check in.
And maybe even checking in with ourselves.
100%. Hey? That's where it starts. Right? Charity starts at home. So
yeah. Well, I want to say thank you, first of all, for sending an email, for sharing your passion for supporting our community, our loved ones, our place of work. I think you're doing a really good job honoring yourself when you speak. There's a lot of self-compassion. There's a lot of talk about working through our own stuff. And I think we need people like you in our community to continue to build those bridges. And, for those listening, we always say these conversations are door openers, and literally opened that door when she sent that email. And we would encourage you to do the same if you want to add to this conversation, or maybe even send us some of what's on your mind. I think the key is, like is saying, is to continue the conversation of mental health, whether it be our own personal stories or listening to someone else's. It's just clearly we're all stressed, as noticing in Toronto. Toronto's not the only place where people are losing compassion. I think we can say we all are. And in saying that, I think we can all benefit from taking a little bit of space and caring for ourselves so that we can care for the people that we love. So one of the ways that we can do that is being true to ourselves. And next time we look in the mirror, maybe asking ourselves, am I okay? And seeing what we say with that. Anything you want to add to that?
Nope, that's all. You hit the nail on the head. Thanks, Gideon.
I thank you. And I love how you say my name. It's so nice. It's so nice to hear your name being said, just like your mom and dad do it. So I appreciate that. Well, I know it's very late where you're staying because you're way ahead. You're in the future over in Toronto. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the space to be able to have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the space. I appreciate that too.